Join us.
Welcome, everybody. Good Yontif, good morning. It is so good to be here with you together. It is so good to be together on this day. Friends, this Yom Kippur is not the same as usual, clearly. But we can't dismiss the power of the day. And if we, like we do every year, allow the liturgy and the music and the reflection and the fasting and the prayer and the connections to lift us, to settle into us, we can, through the power of this day, transform to our better selves, our better community, our better society, and through all that, creating a better world. Our Machzors, you have a couple choices. You can use our regular Machzor. Our congregants have also received the PDF of the Machzor for the day. And if you are on Facebook, it is pinned into the Facebook page. So we really want you to not just watch. This isn't a television program. Participate. Be here with us. Engage. Please, if there are people around you who are distracting you, ask them to quiet down or take it somewhere else. Don't multitask. Be here. Be here with us. Our scene, let me set the scene for you. So we're in our sanctuary and in our social hall, and everybody who is here, and I think there's 8 of us, we are all far enough apart that we can be in this big space safely. We have Rabbi Max Miller and Rabbi Rachel Klein Miller, Cantor Lauren Desnick, me, Rabbi Spike Anderson. You've got Stephen Blick working the back end, all of the different computers. You've got Sam Cohen and Mark Feinberg with the cameras. You've got Seth Steinberg on the sound, and of course, our very own Ann Rollins on the piano. Friends, take a second, give a shout out, tell us who you are and where you are, and wish everybody a Shana Tova. And we rise for the Baruch, page 178.
Page 186, we declare God's oneness with Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto,
Please be seated. We continue with V'ahavta, page 188 and 191.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom alevavecha ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ושוכבך וקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני
אדוני אלוהיכם.
אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
We have so much to be grateful for on this day. Page 196, the Mi Chamocha, our prayer of gratitude.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedor b'kodesh, Norat tehilot u'sefer.
Page 201. Without profound reverence for father and mother, our ability to observe the other commandments is dangerously impaired. The problem we face, the problem I as a father face, is why my child should revere me. Unless my child will sense in my personal existence acts and attitudes that evoke reverence, the ability to delay satisfaction, to overcome prejudices, to sense the holy, to strive for the noble, why should she revere me? We rise for the Amidah, page 200.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, v'Koneh Hakol, v'Zocher Chasdi Avot v'Imahot, u'mevii Geula לבני בניהם, למען שמו ויאהבה. זוכרנו לחיים, מלך חפץ בחיים, וכותבנו בספר החיים, למענך אלוהים חיים, מלך עוזר מושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה
Baruch Hu Baruch
אדוני,
Shema.
מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה.
Amen.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מחכה לחיים וחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים, רופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מחלוק הבעל גבורות, ומדומה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל.
Please be seated. Page 206. We prepare for Unatana Tokef. We pray together. On Rosh Hashanah, this is written. On the fast of Yom Kippur, this is sealed. Who will live and who will die? Who will reach the ripeness of age? Who will be taken before their time? Who by fire and who by water? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who will rest and who will wander? Who will be tranquil and who will be troubled?
I sat in shul for years reading these words before I realized the answer. The answer to each of these questions is me. Who will live and who will die? I will. Who at their end and who not at their end? Me. Like every human being, when I die, it will be at the right time, and it will also be too soon. Fire, water, earthquake, plague. In my lifetime, I've been scorched and drowned, shaken and burdened, wandering and at rest, tranquil and troubled. That has been my life's journey.
Of course, I prefer to deflect this truth. I would much prefer to let the prayers talk about someone else, perhaps the fellow in the next row, or seated next to me, or in the house next door. It has taken a lifetime to reveal that defense as a lie. The prayer is not about someone else. It's about me. It is a frightfully succinct summary of my existence. So now I read it again, but in the first person, and it makes me shiver.
I will live and I will die at the right time and before my time. I will wander, but I might yet find rest. I will be troubled, but I may achieve tranquility. This is the central truth of the high holy days. This is what makes them Yamim Noraim, days of terror. We are vulnerable. Unatana Tokef, page 208.
Let us proclaim the power of this day, a day whose holiness awakens deepest awe and inspires highest praise for your dominion. For your throne is a throne of love. Your reign is a reign of truth. Page 212 and 214. Together, on Rosh Hashanah, this is written. On the fast of Yom Kippur, this is sealed. How many will pass away from this world? How many will be born into it? Who will live and who will die? Who will reach the ripeness of age? Who will be taken before their time? Who by fire and who by water? Who by war and who by beast? Who by famine and who by drought? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who by strangling and who by stoning? Who will rest and who will wander? Who will be tranquiled and who will be troubled? Who will be calm, and who tormented? Who will live in poverty, and who in prosperity? Who will be humbled, and who exalted? But through return to the right path, through prayer and righteous giving, we can transcend the harshness of the decree.
Mirosh Hashanah, Yikatevun, Ubiyom Som Kippur, Ubiyom Som Kippur, Yikatevun, Mirosh Hashanah, Yikatevun, Ubiyom Som Kippur, Ubiyom Som Kippur,
But through return to the right path, through prayer and righteous giving, we can transcend the harshness of the decree.
Uteshuva, utefillah, utedakah, kivin et roh hagezerah.
Page 252. We rise for Avinu Malkeinu.
We pray responsively. Avinu Malkeinu, Almighty and merciful, hear our voice.
Avinu Malkeinu, we have strayed and sinned before you.
Avinu Malkeinu, have compassion on us and our families.
Avinu Malkeinu, halt the onslaught of sickness, violence, and hunger.
Avinu Malkeinu, halt the reign of those who cause pain and terror.
Avinu Malkeinu, enter our names in the book of lives well lived.
Avinu Malkeinu, renew for us a year of goodness.
Avinu Malkeinu, let our hands overflow with your blessings.
Avinu Malkeinu, let our eyes behold the dawn of redemption.
Avinu Malkeinu, Choneinu v'aneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Choneinu v'aneinu, ki ein banu masin. Aseh imanu, tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh imanu, tzedaka v'chesed, v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Choneinu v'aneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Choneinu v'aneinu, ki ein banu masin.
Please be seated. I invite our president, Robert Wittenstein, for a few words to the congregation.
Good Yontif. This is the point in the Yom Kippur service where we would typically spend 10 or 15 minutes to try and inspire you to donate to our High Holiday Appeal. We are not going to do that today. Instead, I just want to remind everyone that you received a letter and a return envelope with a pledge card a week or so ago. We'll send the same letter out tomorrow in email, and I encourage you to provide support for Temple Emanu-El. Please be aware that almost all the sources of our income are dramatically down this year. In addition to that, we have right now 13 more families on dues relief than we had a year ago. We've gotten quite a number of responses to the mailed letter. I'm heartened by the fact that more people have increased their pledge this year than have decreased their pledge. And that is a sign that our community values tremendously the sacred work that we do here. That said, to date we've received only 135 responses, and last year 308 families donated to the High Holiday Appeal. So if you are one of those families who has not yet pledged, I ask you to please, when the email arrives tomorrow, click on the link and make your pledge, and may you have a wonderful and sweet year. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Please, everybody, we ask that you rise for our Torah service on page 256.
Adonai, Adonai, Erachum v'chanun, Erech apayim, Rav chesed v'emet, Loter chesed la'alafim, Noseh avon v'afesha, v'chata v'nakeh. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh v'nora Shemo, Gadol Adonai iti, uniromima Shemo yachtav, Lecha Adonai hagedula, v'hagevura, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach, v'ha'od, ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz, ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz, Lecha Adonai hamelacha, v'havit na'aseh lechol rosh.
Please be seated. Our Torah reading for Yom Kippur morning from Parshat Nitzavim is a reminder of our covenant with God, that we were all present to hear the original words. And today, we are a continuation of that story. Hearing Moses' final speech before sending the Israelites to continue their entrance into the promised land, Moses reminds them of God's words, to love God, to walk in God's ways, so that we may live. The journey ahead won't be easy. God has said there will be life and death, blessing and curse. But Moses encourages the Israelites to choose life and to keep God close. May God give us life, lengthen our days, and help us on our next journey to the new promised land of healing and closure as we pray for new beginnings in 5781. We turn in our Machzorim to page 266 for our Torah reading. If you'd like to follow along with the blessings for before and after the Torah reading, those can be found on page 258.
For the honor of our first Aliyah, we call to the Bima Harriet and Norman Zoller. Norman will be chanting for us Deuteronomy 29, verses 9 through 14, and Harriet will be blessing our Torah. Ya'am ta'amud, chadabat hana v'chaya, la'aliyah la Torah,
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Atem nitzavim hayom kulachem lifnei Adonai Olechem Rashechem Shiftechem Ziknechem B'shorachem Kol Yis Yisrael Tapachem Neshechem Begeireka Asher Vekerav Makonecha Mekote Veseka Ad Shohei Memecha Le'oraha Bivrit Adonai Elohecha U'alato Asher Adonai Elohecha Kol Reitimcha Hayom Leman Hakimotecha Hayom Elo Le'am Vehu Yelaha Elohim Ka'asher Diber La Ve'ka'asher Nishba Lavotecha Le'Avraham Le'Yitzhak U'Yakov Ve'lo etachem Lavarechem Anokit Koreit et Habrit Hazot Ve'et Ha'ala Hazot Ki et Asher Yashno Po Imanu Omed Hayom Lifnei Adonai Eloheinu Ve'et Asher Eneinu Po Imanu Hayom
Yasher Koah. Amen. For the honor of chanting our second Aliyah, we have a wonderful new family, new to our synagogue family, Jolie and Ari Levy. And for the honor of blessing the Torah, we have their proud parents, Mom and Dad, Stacy and Eric Levy. Ya'amu Eliezer ben Moshe, Sarvat Moshe ve'Yehuda, la'aliyah la'Torah. Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Ki hamitzvah hazot asher Anohi mitzabeha hayom lo nifleti mimaha velo brehoka hi lo bashamayim hi Lamor mi ya'ale lanu hashamayma v'yikaheha lanu v'yashmi'enu ota v'na'asena.
Velo me'ever layam hi lemor mi ya'avar lanu el ever hayam v'kachecha lanu v'yashmi'enu ota menasena ki karov elecha hadavar me'od v'fifcha u'v'levavecha la'asoto.
Yasher Koah.
Baruch
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
And for the honor of our third Aliyah, chanting for us will be Jordy Levy. And with him to bless the Torah, we have proud parents, Andrea and Sam Levy, and we also have a very proud sister, Molly. Ya'amu, Esther Malka, Bat Yochana B'Kalman, Shmuel ben Mordechai, La'aliyah LaTorah.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torah. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Re'eh natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim ve'et hatov ve'et hamavet ve'et hara asher anochi mitzavecha hayom be'ahava et Adonai Elohecha lalechet b'drachav ve'lishmor mitzvotav ve'chukotav u'mishpatav v'chayita v'ravita uvarachecha Adonai Elohecha ba'aretz asher ata b'shama lerishta ve'im mifnei levavecha ve'lo tishma ve'nidata ve'hishtachavita le'elohim acherim va'avadetam.
Yasher Koach.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
As we prepare for the Mishaberach Cholim, a prayer of healing for the sick, we remind ourselves that there are so many who are in need of so much support, caregivers, medical professionals, for ourselves, our mind, body, and soul. If we are surrounded by loved ones on our couch, at our kitchen table, wherever we find ourselves, we hold each other close during these times. And if we find ourselves alone with these services, remember that we are reaching our arms out to you, and we are holding you through this screen at all times as our community is always present. We join together in a Mishaberach Lecholim, a prayer of healing for the sick, and please, as we sing this prayer together, add the names of those for whom you are praying, for yourself and for others, while we pray for our healing.
Please rise.
Mishaberach Avoteinu Mikor habracha leimorteinu. May the source of strength, who bless no ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen.
Arms around each other.
Mishaberach Imotenu Mikor habracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Please be seated. Just kidding. We're going to stay standing because we are going to raise and lift the Torah.
That's right. Page 274 for Hagba and Galila.
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל. אבי אדוני ויד משה. La 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. One more time. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la.
Now, please be seated. Geneticists say that less than 0.1% is all that separates the DNA of all human beings. If so, we can only read the words of our prophet Isaiah this Yom Kippur morning, who says, Umiv sarecha lo tit'alam. Never neglect your own flesh and blood, as applying to all of humanity, for we are all, by 0.1%, the same flesh and blood. We are one human family. Only when we recognize and make these words real will our light burst forth like our prophet promises. Only then will our Yom Kippur truly be devout. The words of Isaiah can be found on page 278, and the blessings for before and after the Haftarah can be found on page 274 and page 280. We will be chanting verses 1 and 2.
I have the pleasure of chanting our Haftarah blessings and inviting Avi, Frank, to join me and lead our Haftarah chanting. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'b'Moshe avdo u'b'Yisrael amo u'b'nvi'ei ha'emet b'tzedek.
Kira vegaron al takso kashofar harem koleha Vehaged lami pisham uvet Yaakov hatotam veyoti yom yom idreshun vedad dirahai yechpatsun kegoy asher sedaka asa umishpat Elohai lo azav Yisha'aluni mishpei tzedek kirvat Elohim yakpatsun.
Yasher koach, Avi. Baruch atah Adonai melech mochel v'soleach la'avonoteinu ולעוונot עמו בית ישראל, ומעביר שמותינו בכל שנה ושנה. מלך על כל הארץ, מקדש ישראל, ויום הכיפורים. And we say together, Amen.
Page 291. Please rise as we return the Torah to the Ark.
It's Chaim hi, Lama Chazikim ba, V'tomechecha me'ushar, Terachecha darchei roam, V'chol netivotecha shalom, Hashivenu Adonai, Elecha v'nashur
Please remain standing, page 296. Our God and God of all generations, may our prayers reach your presence, and when we turn to you, do not be indifferent. Adonai, we are arrogant and stubborn, claiming to be blameless and free of sin. In truth, we have stumbled and strayed. We have done wrong.
Of these wrongs we are guilty, together. We betray, we steal, we scorn, we act perversely. We are cruel, we scheme, we are violent, we slander. We devise evil, we lie, we ridicule, we disobey. We abuse, we defy, we corrupt, we commit crimes. We are hostile, we are stubborn, we are immoral, we kill, we spoil, we go astray, we lead others astray. Please be seated.
Good Yontif. Hinenu, here we are, standing at the gates of Yom Kippur. Standing at the gates of Yom Kippur, it can feel awkward. We have unfinished business. There are broken relationships. Today, some of us are missing family who are physically far due to the realities of coronavirus. Others are thinking about family who we have placed at a distance on purpose. As a rabbi, I have the honor of being with congregants through sacred life cycle events. This means that I also have an insider's view of how family dynamics can be so deeply hurtful when someone in the family is estranged. The baby naming without the aunt who's not allowed to attend. The bat mitzvah without the grandfather who's not spoken to his adult son for a decade. The wedding, where the bride must choose between pleasing her mother or her grandmother, who are not on speaking terms. The funeral, where the brother who is living cries uncontrollably for the one who's in the ground, each one stubborn to the very end. I've been by the side of the congregant who was estranged from her sister, his mother, her daughter, and bore witness to true remorse. Never, when playing together as children, or tucking her in at night, or at his bar mitzvah, did it ever seem possible that you'd be where you are right now, apart, with miles of twisty roads and harsh words between you. The way back so complex that it seems impossible. The reasons for estrangement seem justified in any particular moment, and there's an assumption that when they come to their senses and apologize, then there can be reconciliation. Maybe, if you're feeling magnanimous. But with the passage of time, they are as cemented in their narrative as you are in yours. So the gap becomes a chasm, and the sun begins to set. I'm not speaking about cases where there is serious abuse. This is an entirely different category that may truly require permanent separation. But I've found that these are really the rare exceptions. No, most of the time, decisions to banish family members occur because of drastically different politics, lifestyle preferences, or having married the wrong person. Sometimes it's around money, or inheritance, or a family business gone sour. There are stories of difficult childhoods or unmet expectations around the care for aging parents. Like many families, we have estrangement in ours. My mother's brother and I share the same birthday in June, exactly 20 years apart. It was our thing to celebrate our birthdays together. As a kid, I remember that he was over at our house all of the time. He was fun and funny, and was the highlight for me at every family holiday, which he would consistently show up for hours late. He's an artist and not great with responsibility. Yes, we would get frustrated, but everyone accepted that that was just how he is. What was somewhat cute on a 20-year-old was not on a 60-year-old, and his sisters began to resent his lack of involvement with their aging parents. They begged, he ignored, and so after my grandmother died, they stopped speaking to him. Family loyalties quickly took root, and out of loyalty to my mother, I followed her lead. She never asked me to, I just did it. Others followed suit. The end result was that my uncle was cut off. None of my kids, my nieces or nephews know him. They know of him. They've heard stories that involve him, and that he's not welcome anymore. No one has contact with him except for once a year. On our shared birthday in June, he'd send me a text, "Happy birthday." On that one day a year, I couldn't help but to think of him. This once-a-year message was a reminder of the time that we'd spent together and that he was still there. But more than that, the happy birthday was an open gate that I understood as an invitation. Now, I'll admit that some years I texted him back, but most years I didn't. To be honest, I thought he deserved his estrangement. Part of me wanted him to feel the consequences of the choices that he had made. And it was easier to do nothing than to reach back. I now know that I was wrong. Wrong not only for him and for me, but for the example that we were setting for my kids. A few weeks ago, I was tucking in my 11-year-old Moses before bed. He'd gotten in minor trouble over something, and I was trying to comfort him before he went to sleep. As we lay there together in the dark, he asked me if I was angry with him. "No, not at all," I replied. "Do you still love me?" he earnestly asked. "Of course. Dude, there's nothing you could ever do that would make me or Mom stop loving you." And I meant every word. "Well," he hesitated, "what about your uncle?" And in that moment, it hit me, and it left me cold. My son feared that what had happened to my uncle could happen someday to him. Laying there in bed, I began to reel. No way, never. And I meant it. But did my grandparents ever think that their son would be estranged from the family? It would have been their worst nightmare. Without realizing it, our actions had set exactly the wrong example. I desperately wanted a different message for my kids to see. And as the magnitude of what we had done settled in, I wanted my uncle back. I wanted a redo on all the lost time. That night, I found the last birthday text that he'd sent to me, and 3 months late, I answered it. "Hey, it's Spike. Hope you're well. I've been thinking about you lately. Can we find a time to catch up? He texted me back. Hello, Spike. Wonderful to hear from you. Hope everyone in the family is doing well. Let's try to talk tomorrow. I don't know where this is going to go. We've spoken a few times, including right before Rosh Hashanah. I'm not looking to hash things out. I'm not expecting him to change. And so, with open eyes, I am looking to move forward. Estrangement in families is more common than many of us want to admit. It's part of the human condition and very much part of our sacred texts. Abraham cast out his son Ishmael. Jacob and his twin brother Esau were estranged for 20 years. Cain was threatened to be forever cut off from God. But rabbinic tradition does not allow the relationship to end in silence. It adds narrative, showing heartfelt effort over years, even decades, to mend broken relationships, to not give up. Our sages acknowledge how difficult it is to reconcile. They emphasize the spiritual practice of seeking and offering forgiveness, which takes tremendous courage, precisely because it gives us no guarantees. Yet it's the essence of this high holiday season. According to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, despite what the rest of the family was doing, Abraham decides that he must see his son, even if he does so in secret. The past can't be undone. Their relationship will never be the same as it was before. But he and his son can try to make the most of the time that they have left together. And they do. The two brothers, Jacob and Esau, each realize that they can be right or they can make peace, but they can't have both. Decades apart have aged them. They have a turbulent history. They've tried to hurt each other. But as kids, these brothers shared a tent, their dinner table, jokes and celebrations. Jacob made the first overture. Esau's reaction was guarded. Again and again, messages were sent, I'm coming to you. Would you meet with me? Every step of this fragile dance exposed real vulnerability. But when they finally saw one another, Torah says Esau ran toward him, embraced him, fell upon his neck, and kissed him. Then they wept. Cain's desire for reconciliation with God was so singular, so heartfelt, and so desperate that God concedes enough to show mercy. Whatever Cain deserves, God does not cut him off from a way back from his mistakes. In Judaism, when we want to try to understand our relationship with the divine, usually we look to human relationships as the model. But in this case, when it comes to estrangement, perhaps we can look at God's compassion as a model for a pathway forward. On Yom Kippur, our angst is one that reflects what my son expressed that night as I was tucking him in. Avinu Malkeinu, Al Nashiv Aleinu, Rakeim Milfanecha, our parent, our example, do not turn us away from you, leaving us with nothing. Or, Shema Kalenu, Al Tashlichenu Milfanecha, hear our call. Do not cast us away from your presence or cut us off from your Holy Spirit. Don't cast us away when we're old, as our strength diminishes. Do not forsake us. With hope, Adonai, we await you. The Hasidic parable for Tshuva tells of a king and his son. The son left and years later found himself stranded in a foreign land. The prince sends his dad a message. Father, I want to come home, but I'm so lost and so far that I don't know how to begin. To which his dad replies, my son, take but one step towards me, and I'll come the rest of the way to you. I love this parable. For those who feel estranged from God or their Judaism, it provides a way back on intention alone. Take one step, the parable tells us, and God will come the rest of the way to you. But this year, with family estrangement on my heart, I appreciate this parable even more. The parable does not tell us of the anger and frustration that both son and father might have been feeling, whether the prince stormed out of the door or if the king cast him away. All we know is that after years, they are far, far apart. The parable does not tell us that this was the first message that the son sent to his dad, but only that this is the first time that the king responds. I could see this being the second time that the son reached out to his father, or the 5th time, or even the 20th. It reminds us that someone needs to start. A message needs to be sent. But reconciliation requires that the other is also ready to receive it. In the parable, the timing for the prince's message is not specified, but I imagine that it was sent on a day when they were both thinking about the other, maybe a birthday, or on Yom Kippur. The power of the Yom Kippur day is that we're all in this together, thinking about our lives and our relationships and what we can change and what we need to do for that change to happen. This is the predictable and dependable once-a-year check-in that we have with the divine, but also with ourselves. Yom Kippur is made up of a few different services, each one with a different purpose. Kol Nidre sets the tone for reverence, that life is precious, as is our time on earth. Yom Kippur morning reminds us that we have free will to make choices, to make amends, and that we can reorient ourselves to live the most beautiful, meaningful life that we can. Mincha sets the course for transformation. But my favorite part of Yom Kippur is the concluding service, Ne'ilah. For those who every year skip Ne'ilah in order to get to your breakfast, you're missing out. It's like you're watching the same sad movie over and over again, but never stick around to experience the amazing ending of forgiveness and redemption. There's an urgency to Ne'ilah, imploring us to enter the gate before it's too late. Today we're here. Tomorrow we might be gone. Right now we're focused. Tomorrow our attention will be elsewhere. The liturgy cries out to us, if there are amends to make them now. Even if you've tried before, try again. If there are messages of reconciliation to send out, send them now. Even if you've tried before, try again. If there is forgiveness that you can find it now. Life is short. Let go of the wish that the past was different. Ne'ilah ends every year with a grand reconciliation. Pitchu lanu sharei tzedek navo yam nodeya. Open the gates of righteousness, that we may enter and praise the source of eternal life. Open the gates of sacred community, that we may enter and feel its healing power. Open the gates of forgiveness, that we may enter and offer our humanity. Open the gates of kindness and compassion, that we may enter and offer our love. Ken Yeh Ratzon. May it be God's will. Shana Tova.
Hayom, hayom, hayom.
Good Yontif, everybody, and Shana Tova. Please stay with us for our Yom Kippur High Holiday speaker, Alison Goodman, who is the head of the ADL in the Southeast and a congregant of Temple Emanu-El. Good Yontif, everybody.
Good Yontif. I'm Robert Wittenstein, president of Temple Emanu-El. I'm going to introduce Alison Goodman in just a moment. But first I want to say that I have been a member of the ADL Atlanta Regional Board for, I think, 20 or 25 years. I've been on their executive board for a half a dozen years, and it is a lifelong commitment for me and for my family. My father was Southern Council and Civil Rights Director for ADL when I was growing up, and this is an organization that I have a deep and lasting commitment for. It is really my pleasure to introduce Alison Goodman. She's Vice President of the Southern Division of ADL, and her team work daily to fight anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. Alison joined ADL in 2014 as the Regional Director of ADL's New Orleans office, and after many years in academia. Her academic work focused on racial identities and othering. Most recently, she was the director of ADL's Atlanta office, and prior to her work in ADL and academia, Alison was a senior research fellow at the Center for Service Learning in Southeast Asia. And she's been a community organizer around public safety and culture. She has become an avid voice for fighting hate in the American South. Alison earned her BA from Middlebury College, an MA in Latin American Studies from Tulane University, and a PhD in sociology from the CUNY Graduate Center. Please welcome Alison Goodman.
Thank you, Robert. Good Youngtiv. It's so exciting to be with you here today. As a proud Temple Emanu-El member, it is really wonderful to be able to share with my community today about my work and passion. So as Robert said, my name's Alison Goodman. I'm the Vice President of the Southern Division of ADL, a century-old anti-hate organization that fights discrimination. For over 100 years, ADL has been on the front lines of monitoring and analyzing hate-filled extremists, educating and empowering young people to stand up to hatred and bullying, and advocating for civil rights and hate crimes protections. We work with communities, school leaders, and individuals to respond to anti-Semitic and hateful incidents. Our Southeast Regional Office is based in Atlanta and covers Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, and Tennessee. ADL's work falls into three primary buckets. First, we educate about bias and bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hate crimes. We have a robust education platform called No Place for Hate that is in over 200 schools in Georgia and thousands across the United States, helping schools to create inclusive school cultures. We are a national leader in anti-bias education training, guiding schools and communities on a deep dive into unpacking bias in their own communities with our World of Difference Institute curriculum, which we did with Temple Emanu-El's Social Justice Committee for an interfaith program last year. We also lead programs with Jewish teens and young adults to identify, understand, and respond to anti-Semitism, especially that encountered at school and on campus. Second, we advocate for civil rights and justice for all. We take very strong stances in support of many key issues that impact the Jewish community and beyond: religious freedom, free speech, voting rights, marriage equality, immigration reform, and more. One of our biggest successes was the recent passage of Georgia's historic hate crimes law. ADL led the coalition, Hate Free Georgia, that helped pass the state's hate crimes law. And I worked very closely with legislators, law enforcement, and the business community to make it happen. And last, we investigate incidents of anti-Semitism and hatred and provide important intelligence on extremism of all kinds. We regularly publish reports on extremist trends, making ADL a global thought leader in the impact and growth of extremist movements. We do this both online, especially with our Center on Technology and Society in Silicon Valley, and on the ground through ADL's Center on Extremism and our 25 regional offices across the country and office in Israel. So as everyone goes through another major holiday during a global pandemic, sitting at home and watching this from a screen and trying not to dwell on the world crumbling around us or our rumbling bellies, Rabbi Spike has lovingly invited me to talk about a very uplifting and inspiring topic of anti-Semitism. Jokes aside, I'm going to share some pretty stark data and illustrations of trends in anti-Semitism today, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When it comes to anti-Semitism, we are definitely living in dark times. However, as you can probably tell from my demeanor, I do not think that our current story is one of darkness, but rather one of community and courage and light. More on that later, but just stick with me through the darkness to get to the other side. Still, these are not easy times to be concerned about hate. ADL pays a lot of attention to anti-Semitism, mostly because it's a central piece of our mission, but also because we think that anti-Semitism has always been a barometer for all forms of hate. Throughout history, the following has proven true. In times of economic and political insecurity, we see anti-Semitism surge. In times of national identity crisis, we see anti-Semitism surge. In times of general instability, we see anti-Semitism surge. And where there's anti-Semitism, other forms of vile hatred are there hand in hand. So these past 2 years of massive, hate-filled, violent attacks against marginalized communities of all kinds illustrates the rippling effects of anti-Semitism and shows how truly interwoven we all are. We cannot ignore that there is a through line from Charlottesville to Pittsburgh to Christchurch to Poway to El Paso to Hala to New Jersey. It's an unprecedented time in our history for Jews and for all minority groups. From African American churchgoers in Charleston to Jews in Pittsburgh and Muncie to Muslims in Christchurch to Sikhs in Oak Creek to the Latino community in El Paso, every marginalized community has literally been under attack. We are all living in this fear and the emotional impact that hate crimes have inflicted. But there is also immense power in the reality that we are all in this together. More on that later and how it directly impacts anti-Semitism, I promise. But let's start by looking at the reality of anti-Semitism today through the data. So ADL has been doing an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents for over 40 years, and the current news of anti-Semitism is hard. Last year, ADL's audit showed a 12% increase from the previous year and marked the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents on record since ADL began tracking incidents in 1979. The number of anti-Semitic incidents has been steadily increasing in recent years, so much so that last year, the number of anti-Semitic incidents in our country was double what it was just 5 years earlier. Our audit categorizes anti-Semitic incidents of vandalism, harassment, and assaults. And last year, we saw a 6% increase in incidents of harassment, a 19% increase in incidents of vandalism, and a 56% increase in anti-Semitic assaults that targeted 95 victims and included 5 deaths. Looking beyond ADL's audit of anti-Semitic incidents, the FBI hate crimes data shows an overall spike in hate crimes over these past few years. The FBI tracks hate crimes reported across the nation in different identity-based categories: race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and gender identity. Year after year, without fail, race-based hate crimes are by far the largest category of hate crimes. And year after year, without fail, African Americans are by far the most targeted group by hate crimes. This is very, very clear from the data. Yet, anti-Jewish hate crimes occupy the second highest category, with Jews and Jewish institutions being the target of 60% of all religion-motivated hate crimes. And this is pretty consistent over the past few years. We also saw large increases last year in anti-Hispanic and anti-transgender hate crimes. If a rise in anti-Semitism is a barometer for all forms of hatred, the FBI hate crimes data further confirms this. While the data is hard, the ways we see the data illustrated on the ground are even more illuminating. I'm going to share some examples of the types of cases of anti-Semitism we deal with, and I'll cover schools, campus, anti-Zionism, and vandalism. But before we even get there, I think it's impossible to talk about anti-Semitism today without starting with the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017, which really was a tremendous turning point in our work. Not just a change in the way extremists behave, but also in the way we see anti-Semitism impact communities more generally. Even in just looking at our anti-Semitic audit data, we saw a 182% spike in anti-Semitic incidents in the first few weeks before and after Charlottesville. 182%. What Charlottesville did more than anything is it took the most vile and hate-filled anti-Semitic extremists and it put them on every news channel, in broad daylight, in great numbers, appearing united in a great American city. The white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and other vile extremists who led through hate united together in Charlottesville, chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." This was their calling card, their slogan, and they brought their vile anti-Semitic hatred into the light. Before Charlottesville, this type of activity only lived in the fringes, in the shadows, on the dark web, in basements and closed-door settings, in small, poorly attended rallies, and in social media, but not disguised in an all-American prototype of collared shirts and khakis as something normal and mainstreamly accepted. But since Charlottesville, this is exactly what has happened. ADL's fight of anti-Semitism has moved from fighting that which was only on the fringes to fighting a hateful tendency that has moved mainstream. Extremists harboring anti-Semitic ideologies are finding more comfort than ever to move their thoughts public and mainstream. We see many, many examples of this here in Georgia. An anti-Semitic group who believes that Jews are trying to taint the purity of the white bloodline by puppeteering mass immigration into the U.S., dropped 200-foot banners off of interstate interchanges in Atlanta, including the Georgia Tech overpass, that said, "End immigration now," a slogan that seems to collide with mainstream political debates, but the banners had their logo and name all over it as an entry point into the anti-Semitic groups. Chester Doles, a renowned white supremacist and anti-Semite in North Georgia, who just retired from that position last week, hosted a family-friendly and Trump rally to disguise the rally's true cause, to spread anti-Semitism and hatred further, and to make it publicly acceptable to do so as part of mainstream everyday life, as he shockingly tried to merge patriotism with white nationalism. And while sure we see examples of this in the extremist movements, we see the push to mainstream anti-Semitism and hatred infiltrating other aspects of everyday life and threatening to make anti-Semitism normalize. Over the past couple of years, I have seen so many examples of what I would call accidental anti-Semitism. People who generally know better letting anti-Semitic content seep into larger audiences because they just didn't see it as anti-Semitic in the moment. Lots of examples here. Last year, there was a portrait of the Grinch sneering over a Hanukkah menorah wearing a kippah that was posted at Colony Square's annual holiday art exhibition in Midtown Atlanta. A school posted vocabulary words around its campus for every letter of the alphabet. An A was for avarice, accompanied by the Jewish happy merchant stereotype, kippah, hook nose, bag of money, and on and on. In each of these instances, when ADL confronted the issue, the person in charge was always immediately shocked, embarrassed, apologetic, and took down the anti-Semitic content quickly. They just didn't think of it as anti-Semitic at the time. It just slipped through. We are regularly seeing anti-Semitism in the form of anti-Zionism and anti-Israel bias, whether it be in an elementary school in Atlanta last year, where for the school's cultural studies night, one family's table featured a map of the Middle East with the word Palestine written squarely over the state of Israel, with a flag with the BDS logo next to it. Or the numerous instances of Jewish institutions and agencies receiving threatening literature and phone calls from BDS supporters who spew anti-Israel rhetoric that plays into painful stereotypes about Jews. ADL works in schools across the country, impacting millions of students every day. Our No Place for Hate program is in over 200 schools in the Southeast alone. The hatred and anti-Semitism that feels almost normalized in the country and is exhibited in this data is clearly impacting our young people, and we are able to see these trends every day. We are seeing young people flirting with the use of hate symbols and hate language in ways that feel really new and different. At ADL, we teach about the pyramid of hate, a model for understanding how hatred escalates and illustrates the need to speak up to hate when it's in its least intentional form so that people can unlearn the bias they have and not let it grow. Well, unfortunately, young people's flirtings with hate symbols and language is only getting amplified by the news and social media. And rather than being unlearned, hate tends to go on repeat. We see social media posts get recycled and refurbished over and over again and over time. One we see often is a picture of a set of industrial-grade kitchen ovens, Jewish bunk beds written over the top. Every time we do an anti-Semitism program with teens, I am shocked at the ubiquity of anti-Semitism in their young lives, something that felt really different for me in my own upbringing in the South. We are seeing young people drawing hate symbols, like swastikas, without understanding these symbols' history and true meaning. They are just feeling comfortable and curious, doodling a swastika, or drawing one for their teacher, or putting one on the front door of their school. We are seeing teachers approach challenging topics in disturbing ways, and we're seeing a lot of fostering of non-inclusive school cultures. There was a teacher who was teaching World War II by having the students do a simulation, one student playing the part of Hitler and being permitted to do Nazi salutes throughout the school as he practiced for the role. This teacher also taught the Civil War by having a debate, pro or against slavery, with a group of students having to research and argue the merits for enslaving African Americans in our country. We are also seeing a tremendous amount of hatred and bias on college and university campuses. Places that are intended to foster critical thought and free speech are being exploited. And we're seeing these incidents at a wide variety of schools, both rural and urban, small and large, private and public. Swastikas graffitied for students at Vanderbilt, UGA, Georgia College, and more. Aggressive anti-Semitic content intentionally distributed to Jewish students and faculty at Emory, Georgia Tech, University of North Georgia, Clemson, University of South Carolina, and more. And of course, the infamous free speech rock in the center of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville's campus, where horrific anti-Semitic garbage gets painted with alarming regularity, including a huge message covering the large rock surface on last year's September 11th anniversary that said, "Jews did 9/11. Some of the hardest incidents we are dealing with in alarming frequency are incidents of high-profile vandalism. This year, so far, just during the pandemic, there have been many. In Huntsville, Alabama, during the first and second nights of Passover, the local conservative synagogue and then the local Chabad were both grotesquely vandalized with anti-Semitic and hateful graffiti drawn all over their surfaces, messages too painful to repeat here. The Holocaust Memorial at the Gordon Jewish Community Center in Nashville was vandalized with a sheet with the message, "Kikes lie, whites die," accompanied by the white supremacist symbol 1488, 14 being the 14 words of the white nationalist movement ideology, and 88 standing for Heil Hitler, with H being the 8th letter in the alphabet. The Holocaust Memorial in downtown Charleston was vandalized with ugly anti-Semitic rhetoric. And the list goes on and on. Just in the past month or so, we've seen 2 swastika graffiti vandalism sprees, one all throughout East Cobb and another in downtown Chattanooga, where poorly drawn swastikas were scribbled all over the area in both cases. Each of these anti-Semitic vandalisms reach a wide audience. They aren't intended to hurt one isolated victim, but they stroke fear and anxiety throughout the community. They successfully make us feel scared, alienated, confused, angry, and hurt, and they are happening too frequently, even during a pandemic. And as I said in the beginning, historically, we have always seen anti-Semitism surge in times of instability. So as you can imagine, we're very concerned about the current instability that defines our pandemic-dominated lives. And we are concerned about what's to come in regards to anti-Semitism once we are on the other side. The haters know this, and we're seeing them grab onto the opportunities for hatred that the pandemic presents. Extremists are jumping onto this moment of everyone being online as they look for a captive audience. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and ideologies proliferate, and extremists are pushing anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic content widely online. The amount of anti-Semitic content and imagery online right now, it's just pretty astonishing. And this is why ADL, along with some of our coalition partners, has been pushing a wide campaign, Stop Hate for Profit, where we are pushing social media platforms like Facebook to take responsibility, respond, and safeguard its users from the growth of cyber hate. Zoom bombing, where anti-Semitic and hateful language literally disrupts and overtakes meetings, is happening everywhere. We've seen several examples of this just recently. A Selichot service hosted by a Montgomery synagogue for communities across Alabama was Zoom bombed by multiple young men who shouted hateful language and posted anti-Semitic messaging in the chat. A Forsyth Chabad Zoom pre-Shabbat program was Zoom bombed, posting Hitler videos and other vile imagery. And congregations at Taim and the Temple both had incidents of Zoom bombing in their programming. As I said, the state of anti-Semitism today, it's really not a pretty picture. And we as Jews are living in very challenging times. What keeps me up at night is that it feels like we are teetering on the edge of the normalization of anti-Semitism. That anti-Semitism becomes so everyday, ubiquitous, and unextraordinary. I think this is a real fear, and one that we must keep at the top of our consciousness. Yet what wakes me up every morning is the actual communities and victims' reactions to anti-Semitism. Truthfully, I see more examples of people showing solidarity in the face of hatred and having love define the narrative over the hate-filled attack. There are so many examples here. The non-Jewish community came out in droves in response to the vandalism of the synagogues in Huntsville over Passover. The Jewish community was just overwhelmed by the area churches and community groups who flooded them with food, cards, gifts, and actually came out to clean and scrub the graffiti off of their synagogues while the Jews could not work on the holy days of Passover. Or the vandalism incidents in East Cobb recently. We had a powerful interfaith program with Temple Kol Emeth and others, where we had dignitaries, local officials, including the police chief, interfaith partners of all houses of worship, and Jewish partners stand together and state emphatically that this kind of hatred will not be tolerated, and even more, that they would put in the work to ensure it. That day, we announced an ADL program, a call to action, Becoming an Ally, where ADL has been hosting a series of interfaith dialogue and ally-building virtual programs that are open to the community and to build connections and community resources in the fight against hate. Or the numerous school and campus responses, where schools dig into their ADL programming through No Place for Hate and respond strongly to anti-Semitism in order to build truly inclusive communities. There are so many examples here, and we are really seeing school administrators and educators commit to getting this right. Being an ally, showing love, building community. I think these are the narratives that always win and people define themselves with. At ADL, we teach that hatred that goes unchecked escalates. Minor incidents of bias and stereotyping lead to prejudiced beliefs and discriminatory actions. This is how we have hate crimes. This is how we've had genocide. We have to always speak up to hatred and anti-Semitism. We have to never let it become normalized. These are times when we have to lean into community and keep each other close and united. While these are challenging times in a pandemic, and with the swirl of hatred around, these are also incredibly beautiful times where we innovate and pivot to find ways to stay connected and be together. Our temple's beautiful Yom Kippur service exemplifies this, and the great work of our temple Emanu-El is reminding us how important we are to each other. And I hope that I'm providing some context today to show why those relationships are so much more than just the individual. On this Day of Atonement, as we are all challenged by the physical distance, let's all take action by leaning even more into our Jewish community, leaning more into building our allies with others, so that we can all speak up loudly and clearly to drown out the noise and not let anti-Semitism and hatred take over our communities. Now is the time to stand up and speak out against hatred so that we can build a better 5781 together. We at ADL are always here as a resource, and we have a number of ways available on our website for people to learn more and get involved. I, as a Temple Emanu-El member and part of your community, am always here as a personal resource. We are in this together, and I look forward to doing the work with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I sent around a note to a number of people before today and asked for questions for Alison, and I've got some questions here which I'm going to ask, and hopefully Alison will be able to address. Alison, you talked briefly already about the hate crime bill that was passed this year. Are you all satisfied with the language in the bill? And the question also goes on to ask about what about South Carolina and the prospects for a hate crime bill there?
Thanks for the question. So the push for the hate crimes bill in Georgia took about a decade. This was not something that happened in a vacuum. It is not something that, just quickly occurred, but it's something that many of us had been working for many, many years on. And we've had a few wins in the past few years. We've spoken to the Temple Emanu-El congregation. We've worked with you all through the coalition. And our Hate Free Georgia coalition really represented, we had 35 different organizations from both sides of the aisle representing all affinity groups. And it really was a great kind of diverse coalition that made sure we got things right. The bill went through many different phases and iterations before its final passing. And there were some things in the final version that were really surprising and exciting, like the inclusion of reporting was in the final bill. So now law enforcement are required to report hate crimes, which is a great thing. The one piece that I think was missing that we would have loved to have had in there, gender identity was not explicitly stated as a protected category in the bill. We wish it could have been, and in our original version of the bill, it had it in there. It does include gender, sex, sexual orientation, and we do think that that the correct interpretation of a hate crime would cover all cases of gender identity, but we're currently working on some behind-the-scenes maneuvers to get our transgender community protected. South Carolina, we are actively working on South Carolina, and there's a really wonderful coalition that we are part of the steering committee for called Stamp Out Hate. The website is stampouthate.sc. And we're really kind of building a grassroots movement, while at the same time, there's a lot of energy in the legislature for getting it right because they saw what happened in Georgia. And I think we will hopefully see some movement in Arkansas and Wyoming because of what happened in Georgia. So the passage of the hate crimes bill in Georgia, many of us, especially in the context that it happened, which was very close thereafter of the shootings of Rayshard Brooks and Ahmaud Arbery, we committed at the time to the passage of the hate crimes bill as the first step, as this is hopefully going to be a resurgence in our Georgia legislature for addressing more criminal justice reform that is badly needed in Georgia. But the passage of the hate crimes bill, I think, did much more as well, is I think we're hopefully seeing a resurgence across the nation. And I'm seeing that Wyoming and Arkansas and Indiana and South Carolina are all actively ready to kind of get it right. So I think there's good prospects in South Carolina. If you have friends in South Carolina, please have them call their representatives.
Thank you, Alison. The next question comes from somebody who's concerned about things they've read about ADL recently that lead them to wonder if ADL has become a left-wing advocacy group and wanting to know whether or not that is accurate.
That is not accurate. I appreciate the question. Ever since our founding, I'd assume, but definitely ever since I've been at ADL, we have been accused of being too left or too right. There's always somebody that is kind of unhappy with a stance we have taken on an issue or a trend they may be pursuing. We honestly get it from both sides all the time, which to me is perhaps an indicator that hopefully most of the time we get it right. there are currently many, I would call them kind of far-right journalists who are not happy with ADL's positions on our civil rights work or our legislative advocacy work, pieces that have been a part of our work since our founding. And there are many groups on the far left that are not happy with our commitment to the State of Israel and want us to kind of denounce Zionism, and we have refused to do that as well. And so we kind of get it from both sides at all times, which I hope that we are always focused on calling balls and strikes of anti-Semitism, calling balls and strikes of discrimination, and sometimes that might make us lean more towards one way or another during times of trends, but as a whole, we've always tried to stay right down the center.
Thank you for that answer. I'll also point out that unlike many other organizations, ADL has a very long and close relationship with law enforcement, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work that ADL does with law enforcement.
Sure. We do have a very close relationship with law enforcement, which I should also add is one reason why some groups on the far left get angry at ADL. We train more law enforcement on hate crimes, domestic extremism, and implicit bias than any other non-governmental organization in the nation. We train about 15,000 law enforcement per year on the issues that we care about. We want them to report hate crimes. We want them to understand what a hate crime is and how to respond to it. We want them to understand what a real threat of white supremacy or neo-Nazis are and how to detect that as they go in. So our Center on Extremism monitors and tracks extremists of all kinds, both online and on the ground, and they do this really to collect data to give to law enforcement to help them with their investigations, to give to community groups, to provide them with warnings when things are happening around them. And we see law enforcement as a critical component in responding to anti-Semitism, and we will kind of continue those very strong relationships.
Thank you, Alison. Switching gears just a little bit here. This is, someone has said, my son is a senior in high school, and I'm worried about how he will handle anti-Semitism in college. What can we do to prepare?
It's a great question. And I get this question a lot. I think as parents, we see kind of anti-Semitism happening in our communities. We hear about it happening in these kind of isolated community campuses, and we get very nervous. I think the best things we can do to prepare them are to connect our students with community resources, which we've got a lot of great ones here in Atlanta. I mean, we've got Jump Spark, and we've got Hillel and ADL and many others who are here to provide and support your students. ADL also does a lot of anti-Semitism trainings for high school and college students. It's called Words to Action, and it's really about helping students identify anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias versus legitimate critiques of Israel, and kind of understanding the nuances, and then equipping them with the tools to respond. And so I'd highly encourage people to have their teens participate in one of these programs or go onto the ADL website and review some of the resources and talking points, and let your students know they're not alone, that when they encounter anti-Semitism, they need that family network and that community that's going to help them know when and how to respond.
Super, thanks so much. The next question is sort of a broad one. It's what are ADL's legislative priorities for the coming year?
Oh, so we will see what the Georgia legislature proposes. Our Civil Rights Committee is actively kind of working on some research on a number of different topics. I think our number one priority is a hate crimes bill in South Carolina. We are also paying a lot of attention to many different criminal justice reform measures, immigration protection measures. We are always concerned about threats against religious freedom in Georgia. And I'm trying to remember if there was something else. Oh, obviously, and voting rights. ADL has a long history of work in voting rights, especially around the Voting Rights Act. And so we are currently kind of working to uplift and support many of our partners. We actually have a great webinar on voting rights on October 9th. You can get information about it from our website, where we'll have many great leaders from the city kind of talking about how we can make sure we get this right in Georgia, because I know there's a lot of anxiety around that.
Super. And I'll add to that ADL has been involved in the legislature's look at the citizen arrest laws that played a key role in the Ahmaud Arbery murder in South Georgia, and I suspect that we'll see some activity in the coming legislative session, and some of that will have been a result of ADL involvement. I'm going to throw out another one. Stone Mountain and Confederate monuments have been a recurring issue. I'm wondering what ADL's position is and where you guys are in the discussion on Confederate monuments.
Sure. So for those of you that don't know, Robert knows this as he's been involved for many years. Every year, ADL takes kind of a public stand on one or more major policy issues. And we've been doing this forever. And we have a policy book that is about this big that has kind of all of our past positions. And we build our policy based on our kind of record. Our policy is created by votes from our lay leaders in the communities. We have many policy issues of the past that kind of touch on Confederate monuments loosely but not directly. And last year, our policy issue was focused on Confederate monuments and what we should do. And overwhelmingly across the nation, we all voted that ADL should be supporting the contextualization of Confederate monuments at the least, and the removal in many cases. And so our Civil Rights Committee is very actively kind of researching and paying attention to which Confederate monuments we may or may not want to pay attention to, and understanding kind of our path forward there. Stone Mountain is a really interesting one, and working in coalition makes that work really interesting.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I'm going to ask one last question. It's a little self-serving. And that is, for people listening, how can they help? What can they do to help ADL with its mission?
Thanks for the question. Definitely stay informed. I think that is like the most important thing. All of the information that I spoke about today is all pieced together from our different press releases and blogs and presentations over the years. I think it's important for all of us to stay informed about what the reality of anti-Semitism is on the ground, what the reality of discrimination of other kinds is on the ground, and how it is impacting us and our coalition partners. So follow us on Facebook and Twitter, sign up for our newsletter, check out our website, and stay informed kind of first and foremost. I'd also say, lean into your community. I work with Rabbi Spike and the folks at Temple Emanu-El all of the time. So get involved, talk to your rabbis, talk to Robert. We love when people want to get involved and support the programming or help lobby at the legislature or other issues like that. And so there's lots of opportunity. So just stay in touch.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'll add one last thing, and that is ADL always accepts financial donations as well, as does Temple Emanu-El. I want to thank Alison for being here today on Yom Kippur, being away from her family. I hope everyone who is watching has found it interesting and enlightening, and I personally appreciate Alison's commitment to the Jewish community and to the community in Atlanta. And I thank her, and I wish all of you a great Yom Tov.
Thank you.